Ты тут. Друзья, меня зовут Елена Заславская, я являюсь исполнительным директором Сионистской Федерации Украины. Со многими из вас мы знакомы. Я очень рада приветствовать вас в нашей студии, она называется «Діє-Слово». Тема антисемитизма, к сожалению, всегда актуальна. А в этом году на фоне эпидемии коронавируса, по ряду других причин, ситуация с антисемитизмом в мире также изменилась. Распространяется очень много слухов о том, что происходит в нашей стране, как действительно обстоят дела. Есть очень много мифов, и многие в эти мифы верят. Цель нашей встречи сегодня дать вам объективную картину того, что происходит в нашей стране. Но прежде чем я представлю вам нашего спикера Вячеслава Лихачева, я хочу представить слово госпоже Рахель Барац, главе департамента по противодействию антисемитизму Всемирной сионистской организации.
So, hello everyone, my name is Елена Zaslavskaya and I'm the Executive Director of the Zionist Federation of Ukraine. And though I know many of you here, I'm happy and glad to welcome you here tonight in our studio, which is called Diye-Slovo, meaning the verb from Ukrainian. And unfortunately, the topic of anti-Semitism is still very timely. And in 2020, due to the coronavirus pandemic and due to many different other reasons, the situation with anti-Semitism in the world has changed dramatically. And there are a lot of gossips, rumors, and myths about the situation in Ukraine, about how things are going in Ukraine in terms of anti-Semitism. And the goal of today's meeting is basically to give you the objective idea, the objective image of how things are here. And before I introduce our speaker, Vyacheslav Likhachev, to you, I'd like also to introduce and to give the floor to Ms. Rachel Baratz, who is working in the World Zionist Organization and who is the head of the department, basically resisting the actions of anti-Semitism. Please, Ms. Rachel.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. In 1995, I was in the delegation to Ukraine from the Young Zionist Council. I think this was the first time that I saw what was the Ukraine, and a year later, I traveled to Russia. So I know a little bit about life over there, but I am really happy to be here tonight because antisemitism is something that we need to combat all years. I would like to introduce you Lior Elimelech. Lior is the director. Here, he signed to all of you. He's the director in my department, and we will be very happy to work with all of you during these 5 years. As I saw in the summary of 2020, there was an increase in the violence in Ukraine, in the antisemitism, and I know we together can fight on it and we can make it better. So if you have any questions or if you want to do some project together, we will love to hear it, of course, through Nadia or through Elena, sorry. So of course, through them, I would love to get your project. I would like to get your things, and I really wish you a meaningful evening and Tu B'Shvat Sameach. Thank you.
תודה רבה רחל, חג ט"ו בשבט שמח לכל המשפחה, לכל החברים שלך גם. Спасибо большое, Рахель, и поздравления с праздниками. Друзья, сейчас я хочу познакомить вас с человеком, который больше 20 лет назад стал инициатором программы профессионального мониторинга антисемитизма и ксенофобии, результаты которого, собственно, мы сегодня вам и представим. Это сопрезидент ВАДА Украины господин Йосиф Зисельс. Я сейчас предоставляю ему слово, но, возможно, в ходе встречи у вас к нему тоже появится вопрос. Пожалуйста, задавайте. Женя?
Yeah, I would like to introduce to you a person who launched a program of monitoring the actions of anti-Semitism and xenophobia more than 20 years ago here in Ukraine, Vyacheslav, and today we will actually familiarize you with the results, and maybe during the meeting you will also come up with some questions to him. And now we turn the floor to him. Пане Йосип.
Доброго дня всім. Радий всіх бачити і чути. Вітаю усіх з святом Ту Бішват. Хак Ту Бішват Самех.
Good evening, everyone. I'm really happy to see you here, and a happy holiday to everyone.
Коли пані Олена говорила, я подумав, як швидко роки літять. Бо насправді цій програмі вже більше як 30 років, а не 20.
When Ms. Yelena was talking about the program, I realized how fast and quickly the years are passing by, because actually the program is older than 30 years, not 20 years.
В 1980 році пройшли дуже важливі події, і єврейські організації, які вже існували на території тоді ще Совєтського Союзу, себе усвідомлювати почали, збиратися разом, обговорювати свої завдання. І саме в цьому році були сформульовані 4 основні такі корзини, тоді ми їх називали, єврейського відновлення. Будь ласка.
So the year 1980 was a very important year because the Jewish organizations that actually already existed there in then Soviet Ukraine started basically identifying themselves as such, and there also appeared like 4 main points of Jewish renewal.
Я не буду зараз розповідати про всі ці основні напрями єврейського відновлення, але одна з тих корзин була протидія антисемітизму.
I'm not going to talk about all of them, but one of the important topics there, one of the important points was basically resisting anti-Semitism.
І тоді мені довелося, коли ми створили таку організацію, Umbrella, дахову організацію на весь Совєтський Союз тоді ще, це був ВАД СРСР, і туди війшли майже 200 організацій з приблизно 90 міст Совєтського Союзу, і почала діяти виконавча структура. Я якраз утворював декілька перших професійних проєктів і програм в незалежному єврейському русі.
And then I realized that we were supposed to create basically an umbrella organization, the Association of the Jewish Communities of the USSR, that included more than 200 organizations from more than 90 cities from all over USSR. And that basically was the time when I first started launching the first several professional programs concerning the topic.
І одною з перших таких програм це був моніторинг і аналіз антисемітизму по всьому Совєтському Союзі.
And one of the first programs was actually monitoring and resisting the actions of anti-Semitism throughout the USSR.
І ми тоді за допомогою мого товариша по дисидентських роках В'ячеслава Ігронова, він потім став одним з засновників відомої партії в Росії «Яблуко», ми разом з ним створили таку мережу у багатьох містах колишнього СРСР, в яких журналісти, історики, інші фахівці взялися за виконання моніторингу проявів антисемітизму у своїх містах, в своїх регіонах.
And back then, together with a friend of mine who was also like an opposition leader in the USSR and later on became the head of a political party in Russia, we decided to create a network of like different people from different countries, from different cities all over the USSR, like historians and like intellectuals, to basically monitor the actions of anti-Semitism.
Пройшло 30 років, більше навіть ніж 30 років, і ми дуже далеко знаходимося від того стану, коли мало що розуміли, мало що вміли, але дуже було багато ентузіазму на відновлення єврейського життя і, зокрема, на протидію антисемітизму.
And actually 30 years has passed since the time when we didn't understand much, we didn't know much, we didn't really know what to do, but we were very much enthusiastic to restore the Jewish life and to resist the actions of anti-Semitism.
Тепер у нас є такі фахівці, як В'ячеслав Ліхачов, якому я повністю довіряю його професіоналізму, його відчуттю цих процесів, праворадикальних партій, ксенофобії, антисемітизму. І за цей напрям нашої діяльності я повністю спокійний, доки пан Ліхачов знаходиться з нами.
And now we have such experts as, for example, Vyacheslav Likhachev, who actually has a very good understanding and a very good feeling of all those phenomena like anti-Semitism, xenophobia, right-wing parties and organizations. And I'm actually pretty happy about having him here because I feel very much safe with him being with us and working together with us.
Я дякую, що ми можемо, нагоді такі, що ми можемо послухати його зараз прямо в Zoom англійською мовою. І я буду дуже радий за тих, хто вперше його чує, бо це, на мій погляд, дуже цікава розповідь.
And I'm really happy that we today have this opportunity to listen to him here in Zoom. And I'm really happy for all of you who are listening to Vyacheslav Likhachev for the first time, because it's going to be a very interesting talk.
Дякую за увагу. Я думаю, тепер треба надати слово В'ячеславу Ліхачову.
Thank you for your attention. And now I guess it's the time to turn the floor to Vyacheslav Likhachev.
Йосиф, спасибо большое. Йосиф, thank you very much. Я приглашу все-таки еще к микрофону наших партнеров, наших замечательных партнеров, которые очень помогают нам в нашей жизни. Это президент Конфедерации Объединенных Сионистов, господин Дэвид Яари.
I would still like to turn the floor over to our wonderful partners who help us to work and to be effective in our work. And our next speaker is the president and chairman of Confederation of General Zionists, Mr. David Yaari.
Thank you, Elena. And also, it's good to see friends here from around the world. And I see friends also from the United States, friends from Israel. And also, I want to thank both the Federation in Ukraine and for your leadership and for assembling us all together. And Nadia, who is a tremendous asset for us in the Confederation and is a great partner for all of us. I saw also Josef Zisels, and I heard thank you for your comments. And I want to also acknowledge someone who will be joining us, who is Esther Renzer. And Esther was on before, and I hope she'll come back. She is the founding chairwoman of the organization Stand With Us. And Stand With Us is in 20 different countries, 5 continents. And we're excited that they're a partner with the Confederation. And so we look forward to them engaging mostly with the students, but also with all of you. I will be very brief. I just want to tell you that growing up in New York, I never thought that I would experience the kind of rise in anti-Semitism that's happening around the world. This is not just across Europe, but now America, a place that has been home and a welcoming home to the Jewish people and Jewish community. On the one hand, it's a paradox. It's hard to explain because when you look at the new administration and the Biden administration, you'll see the most number of Jewish cabinet members, I think, in the history of the United States of America. You have the Secretary of State is Jewish. You have the Secretary of the Treasury is Jewish. You have the Chief of Staff is Jewish. The Vice President of the United States of America, her husband is Jewish. This has never happened, ever, in the history of the United States of America. And yet, we're seeing in parallel a rise of anti-Semitism that we can't explain. And yet, yesterday, we marked the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, what I call a Jewish Yortzeit. And it's fascinating this year that it's time directly with right afterwards, followed by Tu B'Shvat. So on one day we mourn destruction and death and the end, and then today we celebrate life and the planting of new trees and hope and spring and the idea of building a new future. And that's the balance, I think, of the Jewish people. That's our story. A story of, on the one hand, persecution, but also coming out and imagining a brighter future. It's not for nothing that Hatikva, hope, is our national anthem. And so when I look at my colleagues in the Ukraine, we are together. And we are together, the Confederation, which is a Zionist organization founded by Kalman Sultanik. Many of you know. Kalman founded it while he was in the DP camps in Nazi Germany right after the Holocaust. He represented the Jews who had survived the Holocaust and represented them at the World Zionist Congress, and then led the Confederation for years. What makes the Confederation different than almost every other Zionist organization is we do not look to narrow the field and make it about politics, but we make it about Israel and connecting to Israel. We want everybody to feel a home. And if you want to embrace Israel and connect, then the Confederation is a home for you. And I just want to end with really one comment. I'm sure you're following. I want to commend you, especially in the Ukraine. As a young man, when I was in New York, I stood outside the United Nations protesting for the release of Soviet Jews. I know many people like to claim this, but I was there with Rabbi Lookstein, with Rabbi Avi Weiss, standing as a 16 and 17-year-old, 18-year-old outside. When Ida Nudel arrived in Israel, I was at the airport to greet her. And to see right now that the freedom and the idea that Jewish people are having self-determination, self-expression, and that we're in our homeland on the one hand, and at the same time in partnership with our communities around the world, that's a beautiful message. And so when you look at the working definition of anti-Semitism that is adopted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, it's a simple definition, 38 words. Anti-Semitism, a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, towards Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. That's the working definition. It's been adopted by many countries, including the United States, Israel, Germany, France. And I would ask you if the Ukraine has adopted this, and if it has not adopted, then how we can be supportive to work with you to make sure that the Ukraine adopts this working definition. And to ensure that when we said yesterday, never again, that we mean never again. So thank you for having us tonight as part of this discussion. And we don't believe that it ends here. We look forward to being in partnership with Yelena. We look being forward in partnership with Nadia and anybody who wants to connect and do good work on behalf of advancing the cause of Israel and combating anti-Semitism. We're here to work together. Toda rabba, spasiba balshoy.
Thank you.
Ну что ж, мне остается только от всей души поблагодарить Надю Городову за активное участие в подготовке этой встречи и передать слово историку, политическому аналитику, руководителю группы мониторингу проявления антисемитизма и ксенофобии Вячеславу Лихачеву.
So the only thing that is left is that I wanted to express my appreciation to Nadezhda Gorodova, who helped to make this meeting tonight possible, and finally turn the floor over to a historian, a political analyst, and the head of the group monitoring the actions of anti-Semitism and xenophobia, Vyacheslav Likhachev. Thank you.
Также я хочу сказать, что наша замечательная переводчица Евгения Кифенко.
Дякую. Yeah, today I'm translating for you, and my name is Evgenia Kifenko.
שלום, ערב טוב. אני שמח לראות חברים ועמיתים ממדינות שונות, מישראל, מארצות הברית. I will speak in English. Good evening. Thank you for kind words and for invitations and introduction. Thank you, Joseph, for your estimation of our work. I feel now more responsibility on what I am going to say that I felt before. ט"ו בשבט שמח לכולם. Accidentally, I speak with you from the little Ukrainian town of Volnovakha in Donetsk region, near the contact line. I spent all my day today directly on the contact line where the military actions are still going. It has no relation to the topic of my today's presentation, but I think it's a meaningful reminding for us about the context, the huge political context. In frames of this context, we need to understand the anti-Semitism and the informational campaigns around the anti-Semitism in Ukraine. So I think we need to remember this specific point that the Ukrainian situation is not like in other European or Eastern European countries. Ukraine is the country in the war. During the war for independence and the very existence, the national feelings are always been more important for the population. Sometimes the internal conflicts in the society became more serious, especially if we will take into consideration that the Russians' aggression has not only the direct military format, but also the informational campaigns, disinformational campaigns. I think all of us know clear and a lot of about fake news, troll factories, and others methodologies how Russia tries to affect the informational situation in different countries. And Ukraine, as a victim of the Russian aggression, sometimes became target number one for those informational or disinformational propaganda campaigns. And the topic of anti-Semitism became extremely important for the Russian propaganda from the very beginning of the aggression, during and right after the occupation of Crimean Peninsula. Some rhetoric, some slogans against anti-Semitism were important part of the Vladimir Putin's speech right on the ceremony of official annexation of Crimea, and claims that the level of anti-Semitism in Ukraine is rising, that radical nationalistic groups or open neo-Nazi groups came to the power, and the threat for the Jewish community is really serious and existential. All those ideas were extremely important for the Russian propaganda, especially the propaganda to the West, because Russia understands very clear that the anti-Semitism is something which Western democratic countries pay attention on it, which is important for them, which is the one of most one of others important indicators of the level, the situation with human rights and rights of minorities in general. So speculations about anti-Semitism in Ukraine really affects the reception of the Ukrainian situation in Western media, in Israeli media, in Western Jewish media. Right after the revolution, there were also a lot of efforts from the side of the Ukrainian Jewish community and from our partners all over the world to present the real picture, the real situation with the human rights in Ukraine and with the level of xenophobia and anti-Semitism especially. And it seems that the effectiveness of the Russian campaign around so-called Ukrainian anti-Semitism 7 years ago was not really successful. But years passed because of some historical reasons, because of some dark sides of the history of the Jewish community on the Ukrainian territory, from times of Bogdan Khmelnytsky to times of Nazi occupation, German Nazi occupation, and during the Soviet oppressions against the Jewish community. The Jews all over the world, large part of the Jewish community, of the Jewish diaspora all over the world, have their roots in Ukraine, and more or less all of them, or big part of them, have those historical memory and sometimes historical stereotypes about Ukrainian anti-Semitism, and through the prism of those historical stereotypes, of this historical on family memory, they also try to interpret the current situation. And the efforts of the Russian propaganda, which was very system and has a financial support, there's a lot of international platforms to provide their messages from the international organizations and the Conference on Human Rights like OSCE, or sometimes some international Jewish organizations affected by this propaganda and became channels of providing Moscow's ideas about Moscow's disinformation campaigns about the Ukrainian situation. So even now, after the most intensive phase stage of this propagandistic campaign, from time to time, I meet some articles in Western media, or I've had some speeches on international conferences where speakers operate, or authors of the articles still operates all those negative stereotypes, mixed it with the new Russian propagandistic disinformation messages. And it is the informational context where you could not just talk about the anti-Semitism in Ukraine. You need to understand that the audience could be already affected by the disinformational campaign, and you don't want, it is not your decision, but you need to be opponent for those disinformational and propagandistic campaign. And the most serious challenges is not to become propagandist yourself, not to became the opponent in the frames of this campaign. And as for me, as far as I understand the situation, the best way to speak about the anti-Semitism in Ukraine is to speak about the facts. And we have the facts. Most of my work in frames of Jewish community is work on monitoring of anti-Semitism and hate crimes against Jews and Jewish communities. We provide the program on a systematic level of monitoring of hate crimes, not only against the Jewish community, but any kind of racist, xenophobic, and religious xenophobic hate crimes. So we also have more data to compare the situation, to understand the situation with the anti-Semitism in the context of xenophobia and the situation with hate crimes in general. And what is maybe more important if we speak about where we are now, what stage of anti-Semitism we fixed during, for example, last year, if we speak about the dynamics. We have data for last 20 years about number of cases of anti-Semitic violence, direct physical violence against Jews because they are Jews. And a database on acts of anti-Semitic vandalism. So we have enough information, we have enough facts, we have enough cases, we have fixed it after the serious process of verification and documentation to be sure, to be really sure what are we talking about. We don't believe official Ukrainian statistic from law enforcement bodies because in most cases the motivation is not recognized. The cases we are recognized and fixed as hate crimes for the police and for law enforcement bodies usually are not officially recognized as the hate crimes. So we have our own system of verification, and we can be sure what are we talking about. So to understand if anti-Semitism in Ukraine is rising or no, we need to compare the situation, for example, in last year with the data we have 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, so we will understand the dynamics. Last year was, as all of you know, a very specific one for all over the world, for Jewish community and for anti-Semitism also. As we know from the report of the World Zionist Organization, from the special research of the World Jewish Congress, the COVID epidemic, pandemia, affects the situation with the anti-Semitism in the situation of fear, in the situation of lockdown, economic oppression, and psychological depression. All kinds of rumors, fake news, and conspirological theories became extremely popular. And anti-Semitism feels itself very comfortable in the context of widespreading of conspirological theories. As all of you know, anti-Semitism is an important part of a lot of versions of conspirological theories. The idea that Jews stand by the pandemic itself, or the idea that there is no real danger from the pandemic at all, but the Jewish media create this threat to make this situation with people, with economic, because of benefits of Jewish business. And all those ideas, and that the vaccination also has its some secret side, and again, Jews are stated about it. All those types of conspirological theories, especially in the internet, of course, especially in the social networks, where it is extremely hard to counteract widespreading of those ideas. So in this context, anti-Semitic ideology again became a kind of popular answer for the difficult situation. And speaking about Ukraine, we also will see the specific situation during the last year. But the first point I want to mention is that anti-Semitic conspirological ideas were not so popular in Ukrainian and even in Russian language part of the Ukrainian social networks, as it was for the English-speaking or German-speaking networks. Maybe the idea why is that the Ukrainian society and the Ukrainian anti-Semitism also is not in the Western context. Our context is totally different. The most clear example is that the new anti-Semitism, which for last 20 years became the most serious problem for the Jewish communities in Western countries, when any conflict or military actions in the Middle East between Israel and terroristic Islamic Palestinian groups became a start point for anti-Semitic campaigns and for waves of anti-Semitic violence in countries like France. Ukraine is not in this context of the Western new anti-Israeli anti-Semitism. Our anti-Semitism is more traditional. Our anti-Semitism partly based on the old style historical religious stereotypes, especially in mass mentality on the level of, I don't know, jokes or something like this. Our anti-Semitism partly when it is, it has ideological forms based on the orthodox national radical ideas, sometimes even Nazi style or neo-Nazi style, again, which is not so important for the new Western anti-Semitism. It is not famous for Western anti-Semites, but our anti-Semites are a little bit conservative. They are old school anti-Semites. Also, I think the decades of Soviet anti-Israel and anti-Semitic propaganda affects the mass mentality, and partly our anti-Semitism has its roots in the Soviet times. But our context is different from the Western context. And it is about the ideas. In the end of my presentation, I will talk a little bit more about some new trends, but now I will mention some data. We'll talk about the statistic and the dynamic. I think in like 15 minutes, I will come to end my monological lecture presentation. And then I want to give the floor for questions and the discussions. I think the topic of anti-Semitism always has a lot of questions from the colleagues, from the audience. So I'll try to left more time for the question and try to be brief in my monological part. So what about the data? What about the statistics? Last year, in the year of 2020, we have registered 4 cases of direct anti-Semitic violence against persons. In those cases, as far as I mentioned, we can be sure that anti-Semitism was the motivation of the criminals. Those 4 cases, one of those cases was really serious. In summer, young person with an ex came to the synagogue building in the city of Mariupol, in eastern south of Ukraine, also in Donetsk Oblast. The guard of the synagogue building, who is not Jewish by his ethnic and religious identity, tried to stop this guy near the doors of the synagogue, and he was wounded by the ex during the fight. Then the attacker ran away. This very day, he crossed illegally a Russian-Ukrainian border, and he was arrested already in Russia. Now he is in Rostov, but the Russian side doesn't want to make an extradition him for Ukraine. So I'm not sure that in this case the investigation will be end with the court decision. It was the most serious cases. In other cases, it was physical violence, but not without weapons and not so brutal. One case happened in Vinnytsia. Also, the attacker, drunker hooligan, came to the synagogue building. He shouted some anti-Semitic slogans. He had some, he claimed the Jewish community because of the ethnic origins of the Ukrainian president. For him, Jewish community was responsible for the Ukrainian president, and he didn't like Ukrainian president, and he beat the head of the synagogue community, and not young man, not very serious. The attacker was arrested directly after the incident by the police. But in this case, we also have not a lot of hopes for the court decision because the victim of the attack doesn't want to write any official claims for the police. So we don't have the readiness of the victim to be part of this process. But in 2 other cases, both of them take place in Umань, in Cherkasska Oblast, in autumn, in September and October. In both of cases, the attackers were arrested. In one case, we already have a court decision. So I think that if we have 4 cases and in all 4 cases the police arrested the attackers, it is a good result, because in 2014 or in 2015 we never had no one was arrested for the anti-Semitic violence and for the anti-Semitic acts of vandalism also. Of course, we don't think that our police and law enforcement bodies really do their work excellence, but we see some positive dynamics in their efforts. We don't satisfied by it, but it is better than the situation which we had 5 years ago. In 4 cases, 2 were related with the COVID situation. As far as you know, every year pilgrimage of Hasidic Jews to Uman take place during the autumn holidays, during Rosh Hashanah. And previously, there were dozens of thousands of Orthodox Jewish pilgrims who came to Uman in September. This situation creates sometimes conflicts with the locals, and there were some anti-Semitic, but we didn't have the anti-Semitic violence in this context previously during last, 10 years. But this year, despite we didn't have the really large pilgrimage because of COVID measures, anti-COVID measures, the COVID creates the great fear of every foreigners who came to Ukraine before the pilgrimage. The information about the pandemic situation inside of the Jewish community, Orthodox Jewish community in Israel also, and became a subject of public discussion. The government even closed the borders for all the foreigners during all the months during September. As far as we know, Israeli government actually asked the Ukrainian government to do it, because Israeli government from its side, the pilgrimage will affect very negatively the level of COVID situation in the Orthodox community. So there were only few, several hundreds of Orthodox Jews in Uman during Rosh Hashanah holidays, and most of them already live in Uman for a long period. But the level of the fear among the locals, among the local population, was extremely high. It was a kind of hysteria. And we could understand this level of hysteria only if we will understand the general context of how pandemic affects the mental situation of the people. So we have several cases when in cafe shops or in banks, even institutions, the Orthodox Jews in Uman were refused to enter. The local administration made some statements against the pilgrims, and those statements were not openly anti-Semitic, but of course everybody knows that who they are, pilgrims to Uman, and that they are the Orthodox Jews related to the danger of the virus. This idea became very important for the locals, and in this very context, we can understand those two cases of anti-Semitic violence in women this last autumn. Why I speak so long about the cases of anti-Semitic violence last year? Because previously, during 3 previous years, in 2017, no cases of anti-Semitic violence in Ukraine. No one case which was verified and came to our statistics in frames of our monitoring. So those 4 cases really ground to speak about the rise of stand. The possible interpretation could be the influence of pandemic situation, and also the fact that the president of the country has a Jewish ethnicity affects the situation with anti-Semitism. What about, not about violence, but about anti-Semitic vandalism? During the year of 2020, we have registered 8 cases of anti-Semitic vandalism. I need to mention that our methodology is and our is very strict. We recognized as an act of anti-Semitic vandalism only crimes against the Jewish communal property, synagogue buildings, community centers, offices, or Jewish cemeteries, or memorials, Holocaust memorials, which are the usual target of anti-Semitic vandalism in our country, as well as in Europe in general. And only in cases when we really have enough information to say that the act of vandalism was based on anti-Semitism. Because we mostly speak about graffitis, inscriptions, those inscriptions are the ground to make conclusions that the acts against the building or against the cemetery really had an anti-Semitic background. So we had 8 cases. The most serious were the attack against the synagogue in synagogue building in Kherson. 2 young guys made an attempt of arson by the bottles with Molotov cocktail. On April 20, which is the Adolf Hitler's birthday, as far as you know, the building was affected by the fire, but things got not very seriously. The attackers were detained and arrested, and now the case is in the court. From 8 cases, among those 8 cases, the police was able to arrest the attackers. Again, it's less than 50 persons. We are not really satisfied by the work of our law enforcement bodies in this sense. But again, if we compare the situation with the situation 5 years ago, we need to say that there is some positive progress. Of course, we want more. To understand the dynamics and to understand if those 8 cases of vandalism and 4 cases of anti-Semitic violence, what it is for our country, is it a lot of or is it few? I need to say that during our monitoring, during 20 years I work on this monitoring, the historical maximum of number of anti-Semitic crimes was 14-15 years ago, in years of 2005, 2006, 2007, 2007, we had historical maximum of cases of anti-Semitic violence. We have registered 10 and more cases per year. And we have some ideas about why 15 years ago the situation was more dangerous for the Jews than now. And the attacks were more brutal. In a lot of cases, there were specific aggressive groups of youth, sometimes with weapons, who looked for Jews intentionally near the synagogue buildings and tried to beat them in a brutal form. Now we don't have such types of anti-Semitic violence, so not only numbers, but also characteristics of those attacks now is not so dangerous, is not so serious threat for the Ukrainian Jews as it was in the situation 15 years ago. The situation with anti-Semitic vandalism also was much more worse 15 years ago. We fixed like 18, 19 cases per year. But the dynamics in anti-Semitic vandalism was not so direct. We had a kind of wave right after the Revolution of Dignity in the very beginning of the Russian aggression in 2014. We had like 23, 24 cases per year in 2014, 2015. And partly we think, and not only we think, but also we have facts, we have results of investigation from the our law enforcement bodies, that in some cases, those attacks or acts of anti-Semitic vandalism were not natural forms of Ukrainian anti-Semitism, but were provocations which were made by paid criminals. And we need to understand those provocations in the context I tried to describe in the very beginning, because they were used in the Russian propaganda about Ukrainian anti-Semitism. And the motivation of the criminals who made those acts of vandalism was not anti-Semitism itself, really. They were not personally anti-Semites, but they were paid provocators, and those acts of vandalism happened only just because Russian propaganda needs something to tell about for the Western audience. And we have at least 3 cases in court when it was really, we can speak about those acts of vandalism as a provocations with the results of the investigation with facts, based on facts. We have also some cases when not the Jewish community, but other minorities in Ukraine were target of those provocative acts by paid criminals. The Polish cemeteries, for example, or Hungarian or Romanian schools were objects of those provocations. And we have one very interesting case in Polish court when the Polish far-right activists were paid by one German pro-Russian politician to make an attempt of arson of the Hungarian National Center in Uzhgorod, in Western Ukrainian region of Zakarpattia. And this case also was already investigated, and after the court, the criminals were sentenced. So if we don't believe the Ukrainian law enforcement bodies and courts, we have also facts from the Polish court that really there were provocations from pro-Russian groups, provocations against minorities in Ukraine, including arsons and other acts of vandalism and violence. And the motivation of those provocations was to give some facts for the anti-Ukrainian propagandistic campaign. So to conclude this part about the dynamics and to answer the question where we are now, what is the situation, if is anti-Semitism in rise in Ukraine, we yes can say that in some directions, in some sense, we have a rise. During last year, we have 4 cases of anti-Semitic violence, and 3 years before we had no one cases of anti-Semitic violence. But we don't have rise of anti-Semitic vandalism, vice versa. If we had 8 cases in 2020, we had 14 cases in 2019, 12 cases in 2018. And also, I think that the anti-pandemic measures affects the activity of vandals, because the communications were broken. A lot of people who usually like teenagers drink beer and make some acts of hooligans by evenings, which is usual part of their teenager socialization. During pandemic, they were all at homes. The beer shops doesn't work and so on. So I think the influence of the pandemic in this sense was positive to the situation with the anti-Semitism. But again, if we compare the situation, the data we have, the statistics we have during last year, not with previous 2-3 years, but with previously period of 15-20 years, we can say that the rise of anti-Semitism we had 15 years ago. 15 years ago, the situation was much more dangerous for the Ukrainian Jewish community than we have now. Now we have silence. We have quite comfortable situation for the Jews of Ukraine. In Ukraine, the Jewish community in Ukraine is not in direct danger of anti-Semitic violence. And if we compare the situation with the situation in countries where the level of anti-Semitic hate crimes much more better than me, like in France, in Great Britain, even in the United States, I think you will agree that the situation in Ukraine is not really dangerous. The danger is not really serious if we compare the situation with the anti-Semitic hate crimes in Ukraine and in the Western countries. And the last topic I want to stress is the trends and ideas and what we can say about the perspectives. As far as I mentioned, the Jewish ethnicity of our president could affect the situation, could negatively affect the situation. The very fact that 73% of the Ukrainian voters 2 years ago voted for the candidate with Jewish ethnicity, I think is the good example of situation with anti-Semitism in Ukraine. I don't know any other Western democratic countries where head of the state, elected by the population, was Jewish. Yes, we have husband of vice president in the United States now, who is Jewish, but we hadn't yet, I think, the Jewish president of the United States, and we didn't have Jewish prime minister of France yet. But we have Jewish president in Ukraine, and even his first, during the first period, the prime minister in Ukraine was Jewish also. And we had Jewish heads of presidential administration previously, both of them, both last heads of president's administration during Poroshenko's cadency, and so on. But I also think that this fact that the Ukrainian president is Jewish is not only positive for the Jewish community, but could be a challenge. The Ukrainian population had lots of hopes about Vladimir Zelensky's presidency, but the COVID situation, negative processes in the economics because of anti-COVID measures make society a little bit oppressed. Vladimir Zelensky is not a wizard. The miracle with the Ukrainian economic situation, Ukrainian political situation, with the military situation and the war with Russia didn't happen. So I think all those hopes which felt the Ukrainian population because of Vladimir Zelensky could be changed to the disappointment. And the Jewish origins, which were not important in negative sense during the elections, could be important in negative sense if the situation in economics, in the social situation in general, will change to the worse. And we have some facts to say that, to talk about the Jewish ethnic identity, Jewish ethnic roots of our president as a factor of anti-Semitism. As far as I mentioned, one of cases of anti-Semitic violence, during one of cases of the anti-Semitic violence in Vinnytsia, the attacker motivated his aggression because he claimed that the Jewish community responsible for Vladimir Zelensky. Also, we had some acts of anti-Semitic vandalism where, according to the inscriptions on the Jewish cemetery in one case and on the memorials of Holocaust in 3 other cases, they were not in 2002, they were 2 years ago in 2019, in late summer, early autumn of 2019. According to those inscriptions, we can say that the one of triggers of those acts of anti-Semitism was the association of the Jewish community with the president. And the most dangerous factor is the land reform in Ukraine. New presidential political party and his administrations pass the process of liberalization of Ukrainian market of land. And around this process, we had some waves of conspirological ideas, conspirological theories, that the Jews want to buy Ukrainian land, that the Israeli Knesset had a special article in the state's budget to buy the Ukrainian lands, that the Jewish president make possible the liberalization of the market of land. Some anti-Semitism in Ukraine. Even despite all those negative trends we have now, the Jewish community in Ukraine is not on direct danger of the anti-Semitism. The situation is comfortable for the Jews and the Jewish community in Ukraine, especially if we compare it with the situation in Western countries. Thank you, and if you have any questions about anti-Semitism or about the Ukrainian far-right groups and radical nationalism, I'll try to answer. Thank you. Any questions?
I guess no.
У меня вопрос. Добрый вечер. Я на русском задам, если Женя еще тут, он переведет. Меня интересует вот этот случай 6 января, когда был протест перед посольством Израиля. Потом, в конце концов, посол как-то отреагировал на этот протест, или он вот просто промолчал, и даже, вот я смотрю в Твиттере, он никак не комментировал это. Просто он вот, промолчал, скажем так. Спасибо.
Извините, я просто не знаю, стоит ли мне переводить.
Женечка, если можешь, переведи, пожалуйста.
So the question was about the incident, the protest in front of the Israeli embassy in Ukraine, and like why the ambassador gave no reaction to it and didn't react in any way to this incident.
In brief, I also know nothing about the reaction of the ambassador. I know that the Polish ambassador react in support of the Israeli ambassador, but I also know that the ambassador is in the end of his cadency. During nearest weeks or even days, he will left Ukraine, so maybe he already has no interest in commenting the Ukrainian situation. But the manifestation you've mentioned is very interesting because as far as we know, according to the information we have, it is also one of the examples of provocations which was paid from pro-Russian political party opposition platform for life, опозиційна платформа за життя. One of the leader of this political party is also leader of one of the Jewish organizations, Vadim Rabinovich. But for him and for his party to do something useful, to be useful for the Russian propaganda is much more important than their Jewish sentiments. And as far as we know, this very meeting was one of those anti-Semitic provocations paid from pro-Russian forces to make the image of rising anti-Semitism in Ukraine. And the fact that we have some activization of those efforts during last months is one of these challenges, is one of the trends we could recognize as a negative for the nearest. We have a question in chat. The question is about the conspirological theories about the Jewish conspiracy, which is the real reason for the pandemic. And the question is, there are a lot of ideas, but the very question is that if the wave of anti-Semitism related to these conspirological theories around the pandemic comes from Russia. And the short answer is yes, there are some Russian propagandistic efforts in this direction also. Mostly it is not about Ukraine, but it is in different languages, including English for the Western audience. And yes, there were some scholar research and like investigations, journalistic investigations about the fake news and conspirological theories, including anti-Semitic ones, which was initiated from Russia for the Western audience. But as far as I understand, as far as I know, from my experience and from the research of the World Jewish Congress, from the report of the World Zionist Organization, the Russian efforts are not the most important factor of this conspirological propaganda around pandemia. It seems that all those conspirological ideas there are something natural. There is something which appears in the context of the mental effects because of pandemic. It is something natural for social networks. It is something natural in our times of fake news and post-truth, on the times when nothing is true and everything is possible. The researcher of fakes, news and propaganda in social network, Irpa Beran's, the name of his book, Nothing is True and Everything is Possible. So I think that there are some Russian efforts in these directions, but they are not the most important factor. Mostly it is a kind of natural space. The networks and the pandemic situation creates a natural space for widespreading of those anti-Semitic conspirological ideas. Also, one more question in Russia. Situation in Babin Yar in Kiev. I don't know what our foreign participants know about this situation. In brief, there is a project of memorialization, technically. The Holocaust victim is in Babin Yar. Very controversial projects, which was initiated by some Russian Jewish businessmen, Friedman and his colleagues. Friedman, who is a head of Alpha Bank and who is very close to the Kremlin. They announced a very ambitious project of the Memorial Center in Babin Yar. This project has some support from the Ukrainian government and Ukrainian president, mostly Vladimir Zelensky. I think because of business connections and because of money. And also this project faced very strong counteraction and open discussion initiated by the Ukrainian Jewish community, by Vat of Ukraine and by Joseph Zissers personally. Maybe he could comment the situation much more better than me. And one of these elements of this memorialization project is building a synagogue building in Babin Yar, but on the former territory of the Orthodox Christian cemetery, which not directly the place of the massacre, but is near. And Jewish oligarchs decided to build in frames of their memorialization project synagogue buildings on the territory of Orthodox Christian cemetery. And the question is, could it affect negatively the level of anti-Semitism in Ukraine? And the short answer, yes, it can affect negatively the situation with the anti-Semitism, because construction of the synagogue building on the Christian cemetery is something which could face some negative feelings and negative sentiments from the side of the Ukrainian society. Maybe it could be an intention of the Russian Jewish oligarchs who initiated this project, and also other groups, other pro-Russian groups could organize some provocations against this memorial to show that the Ukrainian society doesn't want to remember about victims of Holocaust, to show the level of anti-Semitism in Ukraine. So yes, the situation around Babi Yar, because of this extremely contradictional memorial project, is a challenge, and it could be not a direct danger, but it could affect negatively the situation with the anti-Semitism in our country. And next question. Were any of the acts of violence you mentioned prepared by or linked to any of the crimes as far as those groups engaging in anti-Semitic violence? Very good question as for me, because the only case of anti-Semitic hate crimes during the last year, where the criminals were not linked with some far-right organizations, but were kind of members of yours far-right subculture. They were not related to any kind of political party or political groups, but they had some neo-Nazi affiliation, neo-Nazi like circle, informal, in their town. It was the arson of synagogue building in Kherson. And of course, if they choose the Adolf Hitler's birthday to make this crime, it is a good example of their ideology. But it was the only case when we have information that the those who made some anti-Semitic hate crimes were linked with some far-right circles. And it is a kind of a paradox, but again, situation in Ukraine, among the far-right groups, anti-Semitism is not really important part of the ideology and propaganda. Maybe some of them, or large part of them, have some anti-Semitic feelings somewhere in background, but it is not part of their agenda. They they have some others victims, some others target groups to attack, which are pro-Russian politicians, which are left-wing or left-liberal human rights defenders, for example, which LGBT community members also are usual victims of far-right violence. Among the minorities, traditionally, the Roma people are victims of far-right violence, but not the Jews. Anti-Semitism is not actually part of far-right agenda in Ukraine. And we also have a kind of dynamics in this on this subject, because some political leaders of far-right groups, like Andrei Beletsky, who is the leader of Nationalny Korpus political party, or like Oleg Tyagnybok, who is a leader of the most strong radical nationalistic political party, Svoboda, they were openly anti-Semitic 10 or 15 years ago. They made some statements, wrote some articles, and anti-Semitism was important part, not the most important part, but one of the important items in their propaganda, but in the past. Now they understood that the anti-Semitism is not popular in Ukraine. It does not possible to make some benefits from anti-Semitic propaganda, even if you speak with nationalistic and far-right audience. There are some much more popular victims for hate speech and hate crimes. But it is not maybe a real evolution of views of ideology. Maybe it is more like mimicry. But the fact is that far rights are not active in anti-Semitic hate crimes, and anti-Semitism is not an important part in far right propaganda now. Do we have any other questions, or will our meeting to be concluded? I think 2 more minutes to write or to ask questions.
Я не вижу вопросов.
Дуже дякую. Thank you for your kind words. Okay, so I will conclude. Our annual report on anti-Semitism in Ukraine in 2020 will be also published in English, and will be published online also, and I think will be sent for all our partners. But a little bit later, we now work on the Ukrainian text, so the English translation will be, I think, in the beginning of March. If you want to be in our mailing list when we will send it, please let me know, or let know Lena and Joseph, or I think you could find me easily in social networks, or I will write now in the chat. Also on this email, you could ask me any, I will need any comments about Jewish life, even the political, don't hesitate to contact me. And I I want to say thank you for the organizers of the meeting. Thank you, Lena. And also
Slava, thank you very
our
much.
Jewish
Very, very-
organization. And I want to thank World Zionist Organization, which supported and initiated this event. ט"ו בשבט שמח, כל טוב לכולם. להתראות.
Женечка, если ты с нами, переведи, пожалуйста. Женя?
Да, я с вами.
Ага. Я хочу поблагодарить Славу за прекрасный рассказ. Я не очень хорошо говорю по-английски, но все абсолютно понимаю, поэтому это, правда, было здорово. Я хочу поблагодарить всех, кто был с нами, всех, с кем мы знакомы и не знакомы. И если кто-то хочет попасть в нашу рассылку наших мероприятий, они у нас бывают и на английском, пожалуйста, пришлите свой e-mail. Женя?
Yeah, so I'd like to express my gratitude to Vyacheslav for today's excellent talk. Even though I don't really speak much English, I still understood everything and it was great. And also thank you, all of you who joined us today here to listen to the speech. And like, if you'd like to receive the letters and the newsletter from us, because we also have it in English, just leave me the contacts, like leave me your contacts and I will include you into the newsletter. Thank you.
Эрика, туда раба. Анна, я дам вам ответ чуть позже. I have a question to Mark Levin. Mailing list, what is this?
Рассылки. Я полагаю, что он хочет подписаться на ссылку.
Okay.
Да, точно. Я хочу подписаться на те, которые ты уже обсудила. Да, если вы можете просто
То есть на рассылку нашу, да?
Да, точно.
Ага, хорошо, договорились. Пришлите, пожалуйста, ваш e-mail.
Буду.
Можно прямо сейчас сюда в чат, я его запишу. И мы вставим вас в нашу рассылку. Так будет самый простой вариант. Окей. О, туда раба. Thank you very much. Ага.
Хорошо.
Окей. Ну что, спасибо большое, Слава. תודה רבה. חג ט"ו בשבט שמח. אני סוגרת את הפגישה שלנו, ואני מקווה שאנחנו ניפגש שוב. Я надеюсь, что мы еще раз встретимся и со Славой, и на разных наших мероприятиях. И хорошего ט"ו בשבט. Жень.
I hope to meet all of you here at our meetings and like the events that we organize here. And I also hope that we will see Vyacheslav again here as our guest and our speaker. Thank you very much and happy holiday to everyone.
Найкращого. All the best.